Rewiring regret, turning past mistakes into future psychological strength. There's a moment that lives in your mind rent-free. Maybe it's something you said 5 years ago that makes you cringe at AM. Maybe it's a relationship you sabotaged, a career opportunity you passed on, or a risk you were too afraid to take. And here's the thing that keeps you trapped. Your brain has convinced you that if you could just go back in time, you'd make the perfect choice. But neuroscience reveals something unsettling about that assumption. What if I told you that the version of you standing at that crossroads had literally no access to what you know now? And more importantly, what if the regret eating at you right now is actually your brain's clumsy attempt at making you stronger? Stay with me, because what happens in the next few minutes might completely change how you see every mistake you've ever made. The illusion of hindsight. Let me paint a picture. You're scrolling through old photos and you see yourself at a moment of decision. In that split second, everything inside you screams, "What was I thinking?" The clarity feels almost violent. The right choice seems so obvious now that you can't fathom how you missed it then. This is what psychologists call hindsight bias, and it's one of the cruelest tricks your mind plays on you. Here's what's actually happening in your brain. When you look back at past decisions, you're viewing them through a lens that didn't exist at the time. Baruch Fishoff, the psychologist who first studied this phenomenon extensively in the 1970s, found that once we know an outcome, we automatically believe we knew it all along. Your brain literally rewrites the memory of what you knew before the event occurred. It's not just distortion, it's reconstruction. Think about it this way. Imagine you're in a maze, making turns based on limited visibility. Some paths led to dead ends. But now picture yourself hovering above that same maze with a bird's eye view. Every wrong turn looks ridiculous, right? Avoidable, stupid, even. But that aerial perspective wasn't available to you when you were actually in the maze, heart pounding, trying to find your way out. The emotional sting of regret isn't just about the mistake itself. It's about this maddening gap between what you knew then and what you know now. And your brain obsesses over this gap because it's wired for survival. Negative experiences get encoded more deeply than positive ones, a phenomenon researchers call negativity bias. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes sense. Your ancestors who remembered where the predator attacked were more likely to survive than those who forgot. But here's where it gets interesting. That same mechanism that helped humans survive is now causing you to replay your breakup conversation for the 10,000th time. Your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, doesn't distinguish between a life-threatening situation and a socially awkward moment from 2019. It treats both as crucial data worth reviewing obsessively. The what-if trap isn't just annoying. It's paralyzing. When you get stuck in this loop, you're essentially training your brain to fear decision-making altogether. Each replay reinforces the neural pathway that says, "Remember last time? You got it wrong. You'll probably mess up again." And that's when regret stops being informative and starts becoming destructive, reframing regret. So if our brains are wired to torture us with past mistakes, are we just doomed to live in a highlight reel of our failures? Not exactly. Because there's a fundamental difference between two types of regret that most people don't know exists. Psychologist Amy Somerville, who spent years researching regret, draws a crucial distinction: adaptive regret versus maladaptive regret. Adaptive regret is regret that teaches. It's the kind that makes you think, "I handled that poorly, and here's specifically what I do differently." It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's also directional. It points somewhere useful. Maladaptive regret, on the other hand, is regret that punishes. It's the endless loop of "I'm such an idiot" without any productive insight. It's self-flagellation dressed up as reflection. And here's the brutal truth. Most of us spend far more time in maladaptive regret than we realize. The shift from one to the other comes down to a single psychological pivot, moving from blame to responsibility. Blame is backward-facing and static. I ruined everything. I am fundamentally flawed. This defines me. Responsibility is forward-facing and dynamic. I made a choice with the information and emotional capacity I had at the time. What can I learn from this? How do I grow? Notice the language difference there. When you blame yourself, you're making a statement about your identity. When you take responsibility, you're making an observation about your behavior. Identity feels permanent. Behavior feels changeable. The distinction isn't just semantic, it's neurological. When you acknowledge regret without drowning in it, you create what psychologists call psychological distance. You're essentially stepping outside the experience enough to examine it objectively. This doesn't mean dismissing the pain or pretending it didn't matter. It means holding the experience in your hand like an object you can turn around and study, rather than being consumed by it. Think of it like this. Maladaptive regret is quicksand. The more you struggle against it, the deeper you sink. Adaptive regret is more like a mirror. It might show you something you don't want to see, but at least you can use what you're seeing to move forward differently. The psychological mechanics. Now here's where it gets fascinating. Your brain isn't a fixed machine. It's more like a garden that constantly reshapes itself based on where you direct your attention. This is neuroplasticity in action, and it's one of the most empowering discoveries in modern neuroscience. Every time you recall a memory, you're not just replaying it, you're actually reconstructing it and potentially modifying it. Neuroscientist Elizabeth Phelps at Harvard has shown that the act of remembering makes memories temporally malleable. This is why regret can either entrench destructive patterns or become a catalyst for genuine transformation, depending on how you engage with it. When you sit with the discomfort of regret and ask genuinely curious questions rather than accusatory ones, you're literally building new neural pathways instead of the well-worn path that goes, "I failed, I'm a failure, I'll always fail." You start carving out alternative routes. "I failed, that hurt, what specifically went wrong, what will I do differently?" Let me give you a real example. Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, talks openly about how her father used to ask her and her brother at dinner, "What did you fail at this week?" If they didn't have a failure to share, he'd be disappointed. He was literally rewiring their relationship with mistakes from the ground up. When Blakely launched Spanx, she faced rejection after rejection from manufacturers. But because regret and failure had been reframed as data rather than identity, she kept going. Today, her company is worth over $1 billion. Or consider J.S.K. Rowling, who described her period of failure before Harry Potter as essential rather than incidental to her success. In her Harvard commencement speech, she said failure stripped away everything inessential and showed her what she truly valued. That's adaptive regret in action, mining the discomfort for self-knowledge rather than just swimming in shame. The psychological mechanics here are clear. Discomfort creates attention. Attention creates analysis. Analysis creates understanding. And understanding creates choice. Without that initial sting of regret, you might never pause long enough to do the deeper work of self-reflection, actionable insights. All right. So how do you actually do this? How do you take the abstract concept of adaptive regret and turn it into something practical that changes your life today? Start with what psychologists call the regret audit. Grab a piece of paper and write down a regret that's been haunting you. Now here's the key. You're going to interrogate this regret like a detective, not a prosecutor. You're gathering evidence, not delivering a verdict. Ask yourself these specific questions. What information did I actually have at the time? What was my emotional state? What were the external pressures I was facing? What need was I trying to meet with that decision, even if I met it poorly? This isn't about excusing the behavior. It's about understanding the full context so you can identify the actual leverage points for change. Next, develop what I call a regret to resilience framework. For each regret, identify 3 things: the mistake itself, the underlying pattern that led to it, and the specific skill or awareness you lacked. For example, maybe the mistake was snapping at your partner. The pattern might be that you suppress frustration until it explodes. The missing skill could be real-time emotional communication. Once you've identified that, you can start building your regret prevention toolkit. This isn't about never making mistakes. That's impossible and would make you incredibly boring. It's about not making the same mistake in the same way for the same reason. Your toolkit might include things like a 5-minute pause rule before responding to emotionally charged situations, a weekly check-in with yourself about building resentments, or a practice of naming emotions as they arise rather than stockpiling them. The goal isn't perfection, it's pattern recognition and gradual improvement. You're essentially becoming a scientist of your own behavior, using past data to make better predictions and choices going forward, building future strength. Here's what all of this really comes down to. Psychological strength isn't about never falling. It's about what you do with the fall after you hit the ground. The most resilient people aren't the ones who've never failed. They're the ones who've developed what psychologist Kristin Neff calls self-compassion, the ability to hold their own suffering with the same kindness they'd offer a good friend. When you mess up, do you speak to yourself the way you'd speak to someone you love? Or do you unleash an inner critic that would make a drill sergeant wince? Integrating lessons from regret into daily life means building small habits that reinforce your new understanding. Maybe it's a journaling practice where you reflect on decisions, not to judge them, but to understand your patterns. Maybe it's surrounding yourself with people who challenge you to grow, rather than just validate your excuses. Maybe it's simply getting comfortable with the phrase, "I was wrong, and here's what I learned." The truth is, you're going to accumulate new regrets. That's not a bug in your system. It's a feature. It means you're living a life big enough to include mistakes. The question isn't whether you'll have regrets. It's whether those regrets will become anchors that hold you in place or ladders that help you climb higher. Every moment you spent drowning in maladaptive regret is a moment stolen from your future self. But every moment you spend mining that regret for genuine insight is an investment that compounds over time. Your past mistakes don't have to define you. They can refine you. And that's not just a nice idea. It's neuroscience. It's psychology. It's the lived experience of every person who's transformed their deepest failures into their greatest strengths. The choice has always been yours. What would you do with it?